What's going on, family? I'm Scrapbook Boxing, the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. We'll continue this conversation with you regarding the complete history of boxing. In my previous video, I discussed with you the great Black Prince Peter Jackson and his 61-round historic bout with gentleman Jim Corbett on the night of May 21st, 1891 in California. But let's discuss Peter Jackson. Who was he, and what was the significance of Peter Jackson during his reign? Well, he was known as the Black Prince. He was born July 3rd, 1861, at the U.S. Virgin Islands in St. Croix. He would die July 13th, 1901, at Sydney, New South Wales, Australia. You see, Peter Jackson was 40 years of age at the time of his death, and he would stand 6 foot 1.5 inches and had a 77-inch reach. He had 78 recorded bouts with 42 wins, 5 losses, 29 knockouts, and he was stopped himself 3 times. Now, I believe in the last conversation I had with you with Peter Jackson, we were talking about his hardware credentials coming into the gentleman Jim Corbett bout. Well, Peter Jackson was an extraordinary fighter. You see, he became the colored heavyweight champion in the night of August 24th, 1888, when he knocked out Boston George, Old Chocolate, George Godfrey. 19 rounds. That was a significant fight in boxing. And the reason why is because Peter Jackson will be the first black fighter to have 3 different titles from 3 different countries. That's significant. He was the colored heavyweight champion in 1888. As I stated, he would knock out George Godfrey. But as we read here, by defeating Jim Smith in London in 1890, he became the champion of England. Let's stop right there for one moment. Jim Smith was from England. He would be the England heavyweight champion. He would take on America's heavyweight champion, Jay Kilrain. And these 2 men would solidify who the champion was, regardless of country, in that bout that took place 1887. They would be presented the Police Gazette belt by Richard K. Fox, and whoever won that match would be given that belt. Well, in 1889, Jay Kilrain, after defeating Jim Smith, would then take on John L. Sullivan. That bout would take more than 7 hours to complete. It was the most brutal bare-knuckle contest in all of boxing. And I talked to you about that fight in a previous video. But Jim Smith, as I stated to you, he would take on Jay Kilrain. I'm going to show you an article of that bout, but we'll continue with this specific article. So Peter Jackson would then become the Australian heavyweight champion when he would knock out Frank Slavin. So Peter Jackson would have 3 pieces of hardware, actually 4 in his career, but when he faced Jim Corbett, he would have 2. Jim Corbett didn't have any hardware credentials coming into that match. Peter Jackson did. Peter Jackson was in with more significant fighters. And Jim Corbett had taken on Joe Joensky, he'd taken on Jay Kilrain, but he didn't really have the credentials that Peter Jackson had. Yet, Jim Corbett would demand much more money, and we'll go through that in one moment. Now, as we continue to read the article, therefore, when John L. Sullivan drew the color line from Peter Jackson, it was an unfortunate day for him. At this time, Jim Corbett was only a comer, but he was coming fast. Now, it would behoove, I'm paraphrasing here, but I want you to get these little keywords and code words that's being used to really describe what the situation was during that time, what was happening to specific fighters during that era. And it behooved him, speaking of Corbett, to beat all the fighters of any prominence, among them with Peter Jackson. And thus the match. It ended in a draw. But had Corbett won and carried Peter's laurels with him when he would face and defeat Sullivan a year later, I'm paraphrasing, he would have been given universal credit for world honor. What are they talking about? You see, gentleman Jim Corbett could not lose to Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson was a black fighter. If he wanted to face John L. Sullivan, John L. Sullivan would not challenge Peter Jackson because of the color of his skin, because John L. Sullivan drew the color line. He wouldn't challenge George Godfrey because of the color of his skin. He drew the color line. So anyone who Peter Jackson would defeat, it would not look good on the resume of John L. Sullivan because of those credentials of losing to a black fighter. So behooving of Corbett in defeating Peter Jackson was a must. A fighter of any prominence, Corbett could not lose to a black fighter if he were to get that shot with John O'Sullivan. So there was no way in the world Peter Jackson was going to win the fight with Jim Corbett. So they tried to make it a no contest. And they wound up making it a draw. That it's important that we take a look at something. Corbett and Jackson fought with 6-ounce gloves under the Police Gazette rules for a purse of $10,000. Let's stop right there for one moment. $10,000 was on the table for both fighters. Once again, Corbett did not have any hardware credentials coming into that contest. Peter Jackson did. He was the colored heavyweight champion, and he was the England heavyweight champion of England. But Corbett was a white fighter, and Peter Jackson was a black fighter. The problem that Peter Jackson had was that John L. Sullivan drew the color line. So if Peter Jackson were to defeat gentleman Jim Corbett, then John L. Sullivan would not be challenged, because Peter Jackson would not get a title shot, and Corbett would have lost to Jackson, so therefore he would not challenge or be allowed to challenge John O'Sullivan. That's the problem that Peter Jackson would have. So what Corbett did, he requested 70% of the purse. He wanted $8,500, and he wanted Peter Jackson to receive $1,500, $1,500. Once again, Peter Jackson had the hardware credentials. That reminds me, if you look at today, Tyson Fury demanding a 70% split. Tyson Fury has 1 title. Alexander Usyk has 3 titles. This has been going on from the beginning of time. And when you look at the history of the black fighter, that has always happened. Archie Moore in 1952, and we'll talk about that then, had received $800 when he challenged Joey Maxim, who received $100,000. And I can give you a complete history of this happening to black fighters. The betting favorite for Jackson, both men, appeared shortly before 9 o'clock. Jackson weighed 197, and Corbett weighed 185 pounds. Now, let me just go back up for one moment because I want you to understand the significance of this fight. It states here that, with an exception of Dempsey Fitzsimmons, that's nonpareil Jack Dempsey, and Bob Fitzsimmons as a middleweight championship contest, was the largest amount of money at stake in the ring until then. No fight held on a specific coast since Sullivan beat Robinson attracted so large and remarkable a gathering as crowded the club that evening. What they're saying is Peter Jackson and gentleman Jim Corbett was such a significant fight. It was very important to the establishment that it drew so many eyes to that contest. Corbett had to defeat Peter Jackson. It was a must. The betting just before the men entered the ring was 2-1 on Jackson. It had been 10-6 all afternoon. Charlie Cook was the referee, and the following is a description of the bout. And what they do is they give you round by round coverage. I just want to show you a specific article. I'm not going to show you the round by round coverage. It goes up to 61 rounds. Now I wanted to show you the Frank Slavin and Peter Jackson bout. The National Sporting Clubs in London, England, May 30th, 1892. That would be the same year as the Carnival of Champions, when John O'Sullivan would take on Jim Corbett. And that would be the first glove match with 5-ounce gloves. But I want you to see something very interesting here. $10,000 purse and a heavyweight championship of British Empire. Very interesting. And this was after the 1891 bout. And as you can see here, Frank Slavin was knocked out, and Jackson would win his third title. I want to show you another article that's very significant. So we're looking at here Jake Kilrain and Jim Smith. The fight, 106 rounds to a draw. And this was the contest I was explaining to you about American and British heavyweight champions would collide. And it specifically tells you about this fight, if I can clear this up enough. But I just wanted to show you that. In fact, let's go to the next article that I want to show you. Now on the book, Black Dynamite, Peter Jackson, the Black Prince, 1883 to 1899. I want to read to you something that tells you that Peter Jackson really defeated James J. Corbett. James J. Corbett couldn't handle Peter Jackson. And I'm going to read something to you. Let's pull this up a little bit here. John O'Sullivan, James J. Corbett, Bob Fitzsimmons, and Peter Jackson. There was a quartet of fisted greats. Now all are memories. Jackson was the only one of the four who never held the title, a heavyweight championship crown. I wonder why. Let's read on. Yet Corbett, who met each in the ring, as well as Jim Jeffries and Charlie Mitchell, and Tom Sharkey, claimed that the greatest fighter in the world was Black Prince Peter Jackson some years ago. Now this is a writer who's writing about this conversation that he had with gentleman Jim Corbett. Some years ago, when I collaborated with Corbett on the story Gentleman Jim, he said Jackson could beat any heavyweight I ever saw. I watched him box an exhibition with Bob Fitzsimmons at the California Athletic Club, and it was like a professor giving a pupil a lesson. I also saw him spar 4 rounds with Joe Chowinski, and Joe, a master in a profession. He couldn't touch him with the glove. I fought Peter for 4 hours, and I think I should know something about his ability. He had everything. Early in the fight, I started to box, and he went right along with me. When I saw that I couldn't tire him, I started slugging, and there he was, right with me. He met me toe to toe. With Jackson, I was forced. Let me see, this is in a way here. Okay, I was forced to use everything I had to get by. Box or slug. He didn't care. Why I say that Peter Jackson was a great fighter in the ring. Gentleman Jim Corbett. That's basically his testimony about Peter Jackson. Peter Jackson should have gotten a title, is what he's really saying. He should have been champion. He should have been allowed the opportunity to represent himself with dignity. He had the hardware. He was avoided by John O'Sullivan. He knocked out Old Chocolate, George Godfrey, in 19 rounds. He had a cousin by the name of Peter Felix. And Peter Felix stated in a memoir that Peter Jackson sparred with a specific fighter and beat him half to death. And that fighter would become champion. Why my cousin was denied the shot. I'm Scrapbook Boxing, the Museum of the Forgotten Fisticuffs series. All great fights and all great fighters will never be forgotten on my channel. I want to say one last thing. The 70% is not new. This has been happening to the black fighter for years. Thanks for watching. Peace.